Today we're going to talk about the end of post-liberalism. Post-liberalism is a false social doctrine that has been advanced by the likes of Patrick Deneen, Adrian Vermeule, r.r.reno, Rod Dreher, and others who I will mention. Post-liberalism is a reaction to the perceived, claimed, alleged failures of liberalism or the liberal order. Another reaction to these perceived claimed failures are the woke movement or the wokeness. And what happened in September 13th of this year was a talk given by His Eminence Cardinal Christophe Pierre, Apostolic Nuncio to the United States of America, entitled Woke Culture and Post-Liberalism, the Response of the Social Doctrine of the Church. Well, what's the social doctrine of the Church? That is the response to wokeness and to the errors of post-liberalism. That social doctrine of the Catholic Church is contained in Pacem in Terris, Gaudium et Spes, which comes from Vatican II, Fratelli Tutti, and other papal documents. What we are going to do is I'm going to go through this speech that the Cardinal Pierre gave September 13, 2025. I was not aware of this speech until about a week and a half ago, thanks to the efforts of Chris Hale and Mike Lewis. Mike Lewis is with Where Peter Is. Chris Hale is writes Letters from Leo, which I recommend reading because it's really some good work, not just about Pope Leo, but it's also really good work about the post liberals and about the Catholics who are advancing tyranny, the guys who are pushing J.D. Vance, to include Leonard Leo and others, and also to non Catholics like Peter Thiel, who is an evil man. So let's get into this paper, this talk from September 13th of this year by Cardinal Pierre, the Apostolic Nuncio of the United States. He condemns post-liberalism as an error. So that's the end of Deneen and Dreher and all those guys. That's the end of following them. They have no credibility. You cannot accept what they're saying. They're finished. Okay, now, again, this talk proceeds from the assumption that there is a perceived problem with liberalism. But the Cardinal says there are excesses of liberalism that have caused the reaction of post-liberalism, as well as the woke culture. So what you're dealing with are excesses of liberalism, not liberalism itself, but the excesses, or the perceived excesses. So what the Cardinal does is he reinforces Pacem in Terris, Catholic social teaching of the Church, as I said before. So let's just get into it. I'm going to read a lot from the document, okay? Because I'm not sure if you know that it's out there. Today I want to talk about a very current topic, woke culture, post-liberalism, and the response to the social doctrine of the Church. Okay, so the historical and cultural context is that there's a crisis of liberalism. So the first of these tensions that led to this supposed crisis is excessive confidence in individualism, dynamics of a globalized capitalism, and then so-called liberal neutrality relative to values, which was intended to guarantee a common space for plural coexistence. But he said, the Cardinal says, some people said it led to a moral vacuum. What happened then is wokeness and post-liberalism rose up, and they've gone in opposite directions. Wokeness, both actually began in the USA, according to the Cardinal, and what wokeness did is raise awareness of historical injustices, empowered minorities, and it actually improved the expansion of solidarity. These were all good things about wokeness. Of course, some of the bad things were there was identity reduction, there was cancel culture, and there's some social fragmentation. Post-liberalism started to gain strength in the United States, and his critique is just absolutely withering. So that's why you cannot follow post-liberalism. You can't go with it. It's a bad system. It's a way to tyranny and destruction of everything good, and a rejection of everything good. And so he goes on. So the Cardinal goes on and says, quote, Patrick Deneen, he names these guys, Deneen, Vermeule, Reno, Dreher, and others by name. He lists them by name in this document. Hey, this is stunning, and this is a complete rejection of their work. You have to reject their work. So so he starts out and he says, Patrick Deneen, author of Why Liberalism Failed and Regime Change Toward a Post-Liberal Future, Adrian Vermeule, author of Common Good Constitutionalism, or r.r.reno, editor of First Things, are prominent exponents of post-liberalism, which is not a single ideology or a closed doctrine. According to post-liberals, liberalism has reached the limit of its own logic, producing multiple forms of failure. Political, by generating paralyzed and fragmented societies; economic, by increasing inequalities, concentrating wealth in a few hands; moral, by eroding traditional values. And so these are the claims of the post-liberals. Although they come from different traditions, they reject things like statism, consumerism, purely negative concept of freedom. The Western left, they say, has given priority to policies of individual emancipation over those of solidarity. The Western right is focused on the individual, weakening the sense of community. And the post-liberals criticize the effects of globalization, which has destabilized the middle class and suburban communities, according to them. They are inspired, the Cardinal goes on, by Adrian Pabst, the author of Post-Liberal Politics, The Coming Era of Renewal, which came out in 2021. And he said, and the Cardinal goes on to identify three major internal currents of post-liberalism. These are national conservatives, which is socially conservative but economically liberal; religious fundamentalists, which are combining a post-liberal economy with a nation-state in which religion plays a central role; and pluralist communitarians, which is defending a personalist and communitarian vision. A common element of these three currents, national conservatism, religious fundamentalism, and pluralist communitarianism, is their rejection of extreme individualism and the proliferation of individual rights conceived as credits, which according to them fragment society, erode collective identity, increase inequalities in favor of the dissolution of states under the pressure of globalization. Okay, this is rhetoric that comes out of the Kremlin too. What I'm saying is the Cardinal is saying correctly that the post-liberals are alleging that liberalism causes these problems. The Kremlin makes that same allegation, as do the post-liberals. The tyrants make that same allegation. So the Cardinal is correct when he says the post-liberals are making allegations. And what the Cardinal did not include is that the Kremlin is making the same allegations because it advances their geopolitical goals. And what he also didn't say is that the tyrants are making the same allegations because it advances their political goals for control of society. Okay, so except for national conservatives, post-liberals advocate for a more active role of the state in the economy as opposed to free markets. They propose to restore the traditional family, and that's an explicit opposition to equal marriage, gender theory, abortion. Some authors propose the strategy of withdrawing into small communities as a space of cultural resistance with the intention of re-Christianizing the West. This is the Catholic land movement, which is just, to me, it's another wrong-headed thing. And I think what the Cardinal is saying here is the Catholic land movement is evil and it's failed and you can't do it. You go that way. In summary, it's condemned, in other words. In summary, post-liberals have articulated various proposals: recovery of the common good as a guiding principle, reevaluation of the natural, strengthening of community and tradition, reintegration of religion into the public sphere, and Catholicism as an indispensable cultural and moral foundation for social and political life. He says some of these visions are close to fundamentalism. They need the state to formally recognize the primacy of the Catholic faith and subordinate civil laws to the principles of divine law. So there are risks and limitations to post-liberalism. Here comes the condemnation. There's an authoritarian temptation. By wanting to replace liberal neutrality with an explicitly confessional political order, it creates the risk of imposing faith instead of proposing it, violating religious freedom and the legitimate autonomy of the political sphere. It idealizes the past. Some post-liberal discourses, such as Rob Dreher in his book The Benedict Option, A Strategy for Christians in a Post-Christian Nation, or Edmund Waldstein in his book Integralism and the Common Good, tend to idealize medieval Christianity as a model without sufficiently recognizing the challenges of contemporary pluralism or the lessons learned in the field of human rights. The next problem, ambiguity of the common good. When we speak of the common good, not always clear whether it's understood as a set of conditions that allow the flourishing of all, or it is an ideological project defined by the dominant group, which with Deneen and company, Thiel and all those people, it's defined by the dominant group. The ambiguity can lead to exclusions or instrumentalization. Risk of polarization is another problem, presenting itself as a frontal alternative to liberalism. The post-liberals can contribute to ideological polarization rather than building bridges in already fragmented societies. I mean, this is damning stuff, okay? This is just damning of the post-liberals. You cannot support post-liberalism with this critique from Cardinal Pierre. Okay, ecclesial discernment. The Catholic Church cannot endorse a return to models of Christianity that confuse the spiritual and the temporal. As the Second Vatican Council recalls in Gaudium et Spes, section 36, the political community and the Church are autonomous, and each is competent in its own sphere, although they must cooperate in promoting the good of the person. Cooperate in promoting the good of the person. Where else did you hear that? Botchman Terrace? Yeah. Okay. Then he goes on and says, Fratelli, the true contribution of the Catholic Church does not, this is a great speech, the true contribution of the Catholic Church does not consist in imposing a specific political order, but in illuminating social life and orienting frameworks toward justice, solidarity, and fraternity. Offering the gospel in a logic of dialogue and an encounter with today's world, with its languages and cultural references. In this case, Fratelli Tutti constitutes a correction to post-liberalism. It recognizes the need to overcome individualistic liberalism, but it warns against exclusionary nationalism and authoritarianism. Pope Francis calls us to build a social friendship that excludes no one and that recognizes the dignity of all, regardless of their creed or their cultural belonging. Then he goes on and says there's a Christian anthropology, and he says that the church insists that every social and political and economic proposal must be based on an adequate understanding of the person. He goes on to say authoritarian, who is made in the image and likeness of God and endowed with inviolable dignity and called towards communion. There's authoritarian communitarianism. Post-liberalism, he says, in its most radical version, risks replacing liberal individualism with authoritarian communitarianism. It's using religion and ethnicity to crush the person. In this framework, the person is defined almost exclusively by his belonging to a cultural or religious community, and his freedom is subordinated to the collective project. Although the common good is sought to be recovered, there is a danger that the community may be conceived in an exclusive way as an us that affirms itself by denying the others. I mean, to read this is stunning because this is what Jacques Maritain and the Fathers of the Vatican II Council and Pope Pius XII and John the 23rd and a whole number of other pontiffs understood was important, the person. And post-liberalism is now being condemned because it ignores the person, it destroys the person, it distorts the person, it doesn't properly understand the person. Okay, the church recognizes the importance of the community but warns that the community, must always be at the service of the person. Okay, this is important. The community is at service of the person. The family serves the person. The ethnic group serves the person. The spades card playing group serves the person. Everything's got to serve the person. Okay? Next item, Christian anthropology of gift and communion. The Christian proposals are articulated around these three fundamental axes. 1. Inalienable dignity of the person. 2. constitutive rationality, which is understood as the person living in relation to others. There's a relationship that has to be defined between the person and the groups and others. Third, universal vocation to communion. All people are called to form one family in God, to exclude both individualism and tribalism. The practical consequences are in the economic sphere, according to the church anthropology. Structures must respect the dignity of each worker, promote solidarity, and culturally overcome identity divisions, recognizing the richness of diversity and unity. And that's all you see with the neo-trads is identity. They're trying to stroke the fires of identity. And the political sphere demands institutions that guarantee freedom and participation, avoiding both fragmentation and authoritarianism. So then the cardinal goes on to the common good. It's a richness. There's richness in the term as ambiguity, but it's central to Christian tradition. And he goes on to say the common good in the tradition of the church is defined in the Second Vatican Council. Gaudium et Spes. This is why the neo-trads and the tyrants and the post-liberals hate Vatican II. The Second Vatican Council and Gaudium et Spes offered one of the most quoted definitions. The common good is the sum total of those conditions of social life which allow social groups and their individual members relatively thorough and ready access to their own fulfillment. That's paragraph 26. It includes both material goods, spiritual and cultural goods, and everyone's participation in its construction of the common good. Everybody has to participate. This is what Peter Riga talked about in his book, the last time I talked to you, the book that was also approved by the church. Okay, ambiguities in contemporary discourse. In post-liberalism, the common good can be understood as a substantive project imposed from above for a national community or part of a society. Instead of serving everyone, post-liberalism becomes a justification for excluding those who do not share the same vision. So it becomes a tool of oppression. It destroys the person. Okay, so the vision of the common good in the social doctrine of the church requires a care for a common home that goes beyond national or business interests, goes to this world idea, which has always been at the heart of America from our beginning. So America is Christian, it's Catholic. It advances these ideas that the church approves and has always approved and recognized. In Laudate Si, recalls that the earth is essentially a common heritage. Okay. There must be social conditions which every person, especially the most vulnerable, can do well. So Fratelli Tutti says there's a centrality of universal brotherhood. There's a criticism of excess liberalism and the markets. And this is Fratelli Tutti's response, according to the cardinal, is the response to post-liberalism. It is Fratelli Tutti's response to centrality of universal brotherhood, criticism of excesses of liberalism in the markets, criticism of tribalism and populism. That's Dreher. Dialogue as a path, the policies of social friendship. Francis develops the idea of social friendship. Social friendship was also an idea that the American founders held very dear. Francis develops the idea of a social friendship which goes beyond mere coexistence. It is not a question of mere mutual tolerance, but of building a true community based on solidarity. It implies promoting social justice and economic equity, ensuring the political participation of all, especially the most vulnerable, fostering reconciliation and forgiveness in the context of conflict. There's also a universal openness of the Catholic model. And that is mutual assistance between countries proves enriching for each. Mutual assistance between countries. Who else said that? Aimé de Vattel, who wrote The Law of Nations, who the American founders believed and read very highly. They thought very highly of him. They read it very extensively. They all had a copy. They all internalized what he said. Those ideas with the American elites, the American intellectuals, there's still elites and intellectuals today, but up until the time of current days of Trump, these people grew our country. They also motivated and directed our country in the right way because mutual assistance between countries. This has always been in the American intellectual DNA. And that's why Trump and his regime is an aberration. I mean, it's Russian. It's from the Russians. Mutual assistance between countries proves enriching for each. So finally, Fratelli Tutti says the encyclical insists that fraternity cannot be limited to national borders or cultural circles of belonging. In a globalized world, love of neighbor must be translated into universal openness that recognizes the rights of migrants, hence the international importance of migration, the shared responsibility in the face of climate change, and the need for more effective international institutions. Again, all these ideas are deep in the American psyche, the American DNA. The roots can be found with M.R. de Vattel's book, The Law of Nations, which the American founders read widely. And these ideas have all been strengthened throughout American history. More recently with Elihu Root, James Brown Scott, Cordell Hull, Philip Jessup, the whole line of American thinking through the 20th century and even into the 21st century has promoted these ideas, and the church agrees with them. So what's the practical application? Social doctrine of the church. The political sphere policy is one of the highest forms of charity. It's not merely technical management or struggle for power, but it's a service to the common good. So some specific application, promotion of long-term policy, defense of the dignity of all citizens, to guarantee fundamental rights such as education, health, housing, and decent work, avoiding all forms of discrimination. Building social consensus is the next item. Instead of fostering polarization, a policy of dialogue, which integrates diverse sensitivities around the common good. In the economic sphere, subordinating the economy to the common good, promote decent work, promote social and solidarity income, have an integral ecology. In the cultural field, in the crisis of liberalism, the fragmentation of the woke culture, and the authoritarian temptation of post-liberalism is authoritarian. It lends itself to authoritarianism. It lends itself to tyranny. So the crisis of liberalism, the fragmentation of the woke culture, and the authoritarian temptation of post-liberalism are at the core expressions of a cultural crisis. The church's proposal implies a cultural renewal based on fraternity. Here are some examples. Overcoming relativism and populism. Promoting interreligious and intercultural dialogue. Reevaluating historical memory in a reconciling way. And educating for fraternity. This is the conclusion he comes to. It's 2 paragraphs. I want to read the whole thing. It sums up everything I've been saying. We're at 22 minutes here. So the Cardinal goes on and says, woke culture and post-liberalism, although they emerge as responses to the crisis of contemporary liberalism, fail to offer adequate and lasting solutions. The first, by absolutizing identity, runs the risk of fragmenting society into irreconcilable tribes, canceling out the horizon of universality and dialogue. The second, by seeking to replace liberal neutrality with a confessional or communitarian order, runs the risk of falling into authoritarianism and instrumentalizing faith for political purposes. Hey, who's been telling you that for more than a year? Moi. Okay? Let's see. Runs the risk of falling into authoritarianism and instrumentalizing faith for political purposes. That is what post-liberalism does. They use religion, they use ethnicity to bring tyranny. Both, in essence, reveal the inability of ideologies to fully respond to fundamental questions about the human being, justice, and coexistence. The social doctrine of the Church, on the other hand, offers a broader and more balanced vision. The Pontifical Magisterium insists on 2 inseparable truths. Human life is sacred and human life is social. Pope Leo XIV also recalled in his homilies and speeches in his first months of the pontificate, from these 2 fundamental certainties derive the principles of the dignity of the person. Solidarity, subsidiarity, and the common good. These principles of the social doctrine of the Church make it possible to overcome the false anthropologies of both individualistic liberalism and the extremes of identity or authoritarianism. Universal fraternity is not an abstract ideal, it's a concrete vocation that translates into inclusive polities, solidarity, economics, and cultures of encounter. End of quote. What are we talking about? We're talking about a condemnation of post-liberalism. So Deneen, Dreher, and the rest of you guys, get out of here. You're done. We're also talking about a reinvigoration, a repromotion of Catholic social doctrine, which we will find in Pacem in Terris, in Gaudium et Spes, and other Vatican II documents, Fratelli Tutti, and other papal encyclicals. So, uh, this is what we've been talking about today, is rejecting error and advancing what is true and right. Thank you.